everybody, I'm Dennis Daly. I spent 20 years with United Press International, most of it with the old UPI Radio Network. And my favorite assignment was going on the road producing and hosting American Montage. It was an hour-long weekly program. Now here's an edited version of one of those shows. The program coming to you from London, and more specifically, the Tower of Big Ben. Brian O'Boyle is our host. He is the keeper of the great clock in the bell tower, the sound of Big Ben unique around the world. And about halfway through our conversation, suddenly there was a loud noise. Now, it stopped for a brief... What happened there?
That's a setting up. It's a piece of mechanism dropping into place. And 2 minutes after that, we'll have a reaction with the chimes.
Okay, so it happened on the second and masked the sound then. That's why I thought everything had stood still for a second.
No, it's just a setting up position, and 2 minutes we'll get the chimes.
Now, Brian, above the clock, there are two vertical shafts, maybe 1.5 inches in diameter, and at the top sticking out are what look like paddles.
Well, they're air brakes. If you liken them to the parachute that comes out the back of an aircraft, what it will do is when the weights start to descend the shaft and turn these big drums, this air brake keeps it within bounds. If it wasn't there would be no check on it and the shaft will just plummet to the bottom.
We would call that a governor. In a way.
Like a governor, not quite the same.
In other words, it creates resistance in the air.
Yeah, as I said, like the parachute.
Okay.
Now, in 1976, one of those shafts snapped. Now, it was the old Victorian shaft. It had been operating for 100 years, but in it was a flaw which couldn't be seen. We hadn't looked. The Victorians, when they built it, would never have known. And it was metal fatigue, and the shaft snapped. When it came for the weight to turn the big drum, which weighs about 400 weight, it then just descended. There was nothing to stop it, no braking mechanism, and it pulled the 400 weight drum completely out of the bed. And if you look, you can see there's a leg now supporting part of the bed, and that's where it cracked.
Before this episode of American Montage is over, you and I will be standing less than 10 feet from the huge bell, Big Ben, when it goes off. But while Brian O'Boyle and I were talking in a level below Big Ben, you remember that first big noise? Well, suddenly the chimes started going above us. But on the floor where we were, the mechanism chattered away and made an awful lot of noise.
There she goes.
Outside, there is this gorgeous ringing of Big Ben, and in here, well, we're inside a clock mechanism. It's not very pretty inside.
No. It's
but fascinating.
Lots of ratchets, and then you get back to that lovely tick, tick, tick.
How do you advance the hour hand when you go to what we call daylight saving time in the States, summertime? 1 hour wouldn't be too tough, but how do you go back 11 and fall?
Well, we don't. What we do is that at a 1:45 or just before 10:15 of the night of the Saturday when it's going to happen, because our time regulates from Sunday morning at 2 a.m. Mm-hmm. So on the Saturday evening, just before the 10:15 chimes, we put the clock face lights out, we let the chimes go, and then we wind the hands onto midnight. And then we just wait until it becomes either British Summer Time or Greenwich Mean Time, and we restart the clock. Then at 2 a.m. we put the chimes back in again, or just prior to it, and put the lights back on.
How many people does it take to do that?
We normally have about 3 up here in this time of year when we're going on to summertime, just to carry out maintenance and to do that. But in your fall, our autumn, we have more people up because we do non-destructive testing of the clock. Because of that damage that I spoke about, we now keep very, very tight look at what's going on with the metal.
Brian, what does it feel like to be a member, a citizen of the UK, realizing that this lovely, one-of-a-kind mechanism over which you have the responsibility of care not only represents what is left of the empire to most people. How does it feel to know that you're the man in charge of safeguarding all of that?
It feels very, very awkward when things do go wrong, and things do go wrong occasionally, and then I get inundated by the press, by television, by radio, by newspapers, by my boss, by anybody. So it gets a bit daunting at times.
We have climbed the more than 300 steps to the top of Big Ben at the Parliament buildings in London. Brian O'Boyle is our host, a jovial man who is in charge of the clock, the keeper of the clock, if you will. We have been underneath the big bells looking at the clock mechanism. Then Brian and I climbed a few more steps and stood just beside the massive bell known as Big Ben. Well, now, as we look at Big Ben, and we're only about 10 feet from it here, the massive striker, if you will. Normally inside a bell, it's called a clapper. I don't know whether it's the same thing outside, but it is hammer. Just a hammer, which is about 1.5 by 1 foot, a huge cube of metal on a large assembly to swing it down. Is that also run then by the weight of the clock? Is it all one mechanism?
There's two mechanisms. One uses for the chimes. There's one weight that goes down the shaft and operates the chimes, and there's a weight for itself for the actual strike on Big Ben. So there's two weights, two shafts.
I still can't imagine we're within a minute or so that we should be this close.
Oh, don't worry. About the only thing that's going to suffer will be your recorder. I hope you've got it turned down a bit.
And that I could do. Most broadcasters carry fairly decent recorders with them. I had a way to make my microphone less sensitive. Kind of the mechanical version of putting your fingers over your ears. So here we are, 10 feet away from Big Ben, with the microphone pointed away from the chimes, counting down to the top of the hour. First the Westminster chimes, and then from the closest you'll probably ever get, the magic sound of Big Ben. Then Brian O'Boyle and I stood back, we watched the hammer raise, and here's the sound. Brian, we're a level above the great Big Ben, and what do we have here strapped to one of the beams?
Well, you have the microphones that take out the sound of Big Ben to the World Service and any other BBC programmes. And they've had microphones here since about 1924. In 1923, Radio 2LO, I think it was called, run from Savoy Hill, decided as a treat they would put microphones in for New Year. And they were mounted across the road on one of our buildings. The one we were talking about just now is going to be pulled, or is pulled down. And they got so many nice reports in from people who had the old Cat's Whisker radio sets that they decided to make it a permanent thing. But there was too much traffic noise, even in those days, to have the microphone there. So they moved them into the palace, and they put them inside a football bladder, our soccer bladder. Similar to the muffs that you have on mics today to take out the wind noise and what have you. Then in about 1929 they put a better quality mic in because they started to really move on with radio. And then in 1934 they had the Big Ben going round the world for King George V, giving his Christmas message to all the empire as it was in those days.
And there you have it, another edited episode of one of the American Montage programs prepared for the UPI Radio Network back in the 1980s and 90s. I'm Dennis Daly. Thanks for listening. Thanks for going with me this week. And check YouTube for more American Montage programs.